Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, but more specifically, we're going to be discussing Bitcoin dominance. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. The Bitcoin dominance is, of course, one of the most important metrics, in my opinion, to follow in the Cryptoverse. Had you followed it for the last couple of years, it would have helped you to identify that most altcoins, not all, but most of them would be collectively bleeding against Bitcoin for the foreseeable future. And one of the things that I've noticed is that every time dominance gets any type of a pullback, it leads to a lot of people then wanting to YOLO back into the altcoin market. They call for altcoin season. And what eventually happens is the dominance just becomes sort of battle hardened at higher and higher levels, right? So it moves up some, consolidates for a while, sort of solidifies that altcoins shall not pass a certain threshold on their Bitcoin pairs, and then it moves up again. The dominance moves up again. Those altcoins get wrecked again, and then we go through this process, okay? So in this video, we're going to be talking about a lot of different things, about how we can better understand the most likely path for the altcoin market. And I do know that I make these videos somewhat frequently, but there are quite a few people that are very vocal and critical of my views on the dominance, and they have been for the last 2 years. And I still struggle to understand what part of this view has been incorrect. You know, the dominance has moved higher, alt Bitcoin pairs are getting wrecked, but there are many that will not believe it every step of the way. And so while I will admit that there could be something that I'm missing, and I understand that I get things wrong quite frequently, so that's not to say that I can't be wrong. I could certainly be wrong, but I will at least provide the evidence for the Bitcoin dominance bullish theory. So bullish on the Bitcoin dominance, which is what I have been for quite some time. And I'm going to try to do the best job that I can to explain why the dominance should continue to go up at least through the end of the year. Once we get to the end of the year, when we know we go into a new year, a lot of times macro things can change, or at least, macro trends. And so it might be time to reassess. But for right now, I still think it makes the most sense to be macro bullish on the Bitcoin dominance. And now I will explain why. One of the things that you can look at, a very rudimentary thing, is sort of just drawing a trend line. And believe me, this dominance theory is not based on building out these trend lines. But in general, I mean, the dominance has just been putting in a series of higher lows. I mean, since November of 2022. And this includes stablecoins. If you exclude stablecoins, which we'll look at a bit later, you can see that it's been putting in higher lows since May of 2021, in fact. One of the reasons we just went lower over here was because of the stablecoin dominance being so high. But if you exclude stablecoins, the dominance never actually went to a lower low. But including stablecoins, which again is an important way to look at the Bitcoin dominance, even though it doesn't necessarily tell you exactly what all Bitcoin pairs are doing, you can see that in general, we have been putting in a series of higher lows. And what's interesting, and we talked about this at length, is that the reason why I'm more bullish on Bitcoin dominance than I am on Bitcoin USD is because in pre-halving years, Bitcoin usually spends half the year going up and half the year going down. Whereas Bitcoin dominance should trend higher, likely for the entire year, right? So to me, it makes more sense to be bullish on the thing that likely goes up for the entire year rather than something that I think will just spend half the year going up and half the year going down. And if you were to go look at a Bitcoin USD chart and think about this idea of Bitcoin spending half the year going up and half the year going down, at this point, it seems to be potentially materializing, does it not? The high that we have put in so far occurred in about early to mid-July, or approximately halfway through the year. So the general idea is that there is this, this thinking that perhaps we just spend the first half of the year going up and the second half of the year going down. But the dominance of Bitcoin, regardless of the direction of Bitcoin USD, should go up no matter what, right? And that way, everyone gets wrecked who's been basically DCAing altcoins for the most part. I mean, there's a few that maybe haven't gone down as much, but most of them have. And so all these people get wrecked. Bitcoin more or less, doesn't accomplish anything through the year. I mean, it might end the year somewhere down over here, but the dominance could have gone from 40 to 60%, right? So Bitcoin USD might pick back up where it left off, not that different. The starting price might be very similar to the ending price at the end of the year, but the dominance could have completely changed, right? And it went maybe from 40% to 60%. Now, one of the reasons that we were also talking about this is, do you remember back in June when Bitcoin USD hit the bull market support band? Do you remember that? And in that video, we said, actually beforehand, we said that a bounce off of the bull market support band would likely cause altcoins to backtest the bull market support band, right? So this is Bitcoin USD, but if you were to go look at, say, Total 3, you'll remember that in June, it was that bounce off of the bull market support band by Bitcoin that led to Total 3 bouncing back up only to get rejected by the bull market support band, right? So if you go further up the risk curve, these altcoins were already well below their 20-week SMA. So yes, Bitcoin bounced off of its bull market support band on its USD pair, but all it led to the altcoin market was basically backtesting the 20-week SMA. Bitcoin is, fairly well off its lows, right? It's fairly well off its lows right now, whereas Total 3 is not. The altcoin market barely accomplished anything when Bitcoin went up 2x. So if Bitcoin were to go down for the second half of the year, which is my base case, then where does that leave the altcoin market? And again, to me, it likely means the altcoin market putting in much lower levels, especially on their Bitcoin pairs. One thing that I want to talk about just briefly before we get too much further into this video, and this is an interesting pattern, so I want you to be on the lookout for it. And basically what happens is that Bitcoin moves up, it consolidates, right? It puts in the series of lower highs, it eventually breaks out of that level, and then back tests it, and then quickly moves up to a new level, right? So you can pretty clearly see that trend, right? Move up, consolidate, come back down, scare everyone, make everyone think it's time for alt season again, break out, get everyone super worried about altcoins, only then back test it and lead to those altcoins quickly going back up on their Bitcoin pairs, only for then the dominance to just rocket up to a new level, okay? And then you can see the trend repeats itself, right? The trend repeats itself. What happens? Bitcoin dominance, right? You can see that it sort of puts in a series of lower highs, right? A series of lower highs after the consolidation phase, after we put in a new high, we eventually put in a series of lower highs. We break out of it, and then we come back down to back test it, and then we shoot up into a new level, right? Into a new level. So you can see this trend has clearly occurred 2 separate times, right? So here and here. And yet again, we find ourselves in a very similar situation where the dominance has been putting in these lower highs, and now it's in the process of breaking out. So there still does remain a chance that the dominance comes back down to sort of backtest this, right? And I guarantee you that if it does, a lot of people will use it as an opportunity to sort of dunk on the Bitcoin dominance once again. But I would argue that if that happens, which there's no guarantee that it does, but if it does, it would probably just lead to another sharp rebound to a new yearly high, right? Something like that. So, up to a new yearly high. I don't know if it'll go all the way, to 60%. I mean, maybe it goes to like 54 to 55% in that move, assuming that it occurs. But that is what I would be looking for over the coming months, right? Or coming weeks, is to see Bitcoin dominance continue to trend higher. To be clear, I don't know that it's going to bounce back off of this level. I'm not trading that. I'm generally bearish on all Bitcoin pairs. I have no fundamental reason to believe they're going to go up at this phase of the market cycle. But that is something that you should be on the lookout for, because it was a trend that was previously repeated a couple times, right? Breakout, backtest, new high. Breakout, backtest, new high. Breakout, maybe we backtest it, and then a new high on the Bitcoin dominance. So just be on the lookout for something like that. If we don't backtest it, then that would even be more bullish for the Bitcoin dominance, to be completely honest, because it would show you just how strong the dominance is. If it doesn't even go back down to sort of backtest this. But again, it sort of makes it battle hardened, right? Like we move up, we put in a low, and we sort of just double check to make sure that, all right, let's go double check, make sure everything's good. All right, we held it, move up. Kind of the same thing over and over again, right? You want to make sure, the market will make sure that altcoins can't break out on their Bitcoin pairs. If they can't, we move up again. Same thing, right? Check to see if they break out on their Bitcoin pairs. If they can't, you move up again. And I don't think that this time is going to be any different. I think the dominance will continue higher. And that's one of the reasons why I do. But if you remember back to this idea of total 3, right? So we talked about how total 3, when Bitcoin bounces off the 20-week back in June, we said total 3 could backtest its own bull market support band, and it did, right? We also said that when the S&P, if you go further down the risk curve, when the S&P bounces off its bull market support band, which could occur in August or September, right? We said that in August or September, the S&P normally gets a seasonal correction in pre-election years, right? Don't take my word for it. I would encourage you not to take my word for it. So let's go take a look, right? Don't take my word for it. Let's go take a look. And if you pull up year-to-date ROI for, let's look at the S&P 500. So we'll pull up the S&P. And what we're going to do is we're essentially just going to add the average of all prior pre-election years, right? And we're going to hide everything, and we're going to just simply look at 2023 and look at the prior average of all pre-election years. And typically in August or September, it knocks Bitcoin. We see the S&P correct, and then it knocks Bitcoin into a downtrend for the rest of the year. We've seen that many, many times. But as the S&P bounces, we said that if the S&P bounces off the 20-week SMA, then it could lead to Bitcoin backtesting its own bull market support band, just like the altcoin market did. But when Bitcoin moves up like this, it tends to make the dominance go up, right? Bounces by Bitcoin tend to make the dominance go up. And that's, again, another reason why the dominance should eventually trend higher. Altcoins just simply cannot compete with Bitcoin at this phase of the market cycle. Any moves to the upside by Bitcoin, if it goes to 27 or 28K, the altcoin market likely can't keep up. And if it does keep up in the short term and we see Bitcoin dominance backtested, it's probably just a way to lure more people in, only for then the altcoin market to go down again on its Bitcoin pair. But remember when Bitcoin USD backtested the 20-week and then bounced in June? Dominance during that time was so strong that it did not even hit the 20-week SMA, right? So that was the reason. Another reason to say why it made more sense to be bullish on Bitcoin dominance than Bitcoin USD was because Bitcoin dominance was so strong, it didn't even get to the 20-week SMA during that June backtest by Bitcoin USD. So that when Bitcoin dropped below its 20-week SMA later on in the year, in line with the theory that Bitcoin USD goes up for half the year and down for half the year in pre-halving years, Bitcoin dominance might actually hold the line because it has some wiggle room, whereas Bitcoin USD did not. It already tested it once and was already putting in one weekly close below the 20-week SMA, but it did close above the 21-week EMA. That's what happened, right? So dominance now has the luxury of bouncing off the bull market support band because it never came close to it previously. And so that's another reason why I still remain bullish on the Bitcoin dominance. Another thing to look at is look at total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. So this is looking at the altcoin market minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. And it looks like the altcoin market could collectively be an oscillator against Bitcoin, where it tops out approximately at parity with Bitcoin, where the altcoin market is approximately the same as Bitcoin's market cap. So the collective altcoin market is the same as Bitcoin market cap, but perhaps it bottoms out at around 25%. Right now, we're at 46%. But if you look at the bull market support band for this metric, you can see that it ranges from 47 to 49%. And so we came back up to it, and you can see that the altcoin market collectively is getting rejected on their Bitcoin pairs. Look at this. This is now 4 weeks in a row where this altcoin metric, this total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin market cap, where it's going down, right? It's just slowly going back down. It looks like it's being rejected by the bull market support band. By the way, this was a very similar area that it was rejected at back in 2019, right? We sort of got it. We came down to these levels. We bounced back up only to get rejected and come back down. And I think the same thing is likely to play out. And we can sort of see that happening right before our eyes. And we'll talk about a few of these altcoins. If you look at total 2 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, sorry, this is total 2. If you look at total 2 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, you can see a very similar trend where it's got rejected last cycle at around 89%, and that's looking like where it potentially got rejected at here, and now it's back down to 84%. And you can see that it got rejected right at the bull market support band, right? It rallies back up. It draws people off sides. It gives them a false sense of security. Bitcoin dominance has that slight pullback, but then what happens? Bitcoin dominance then bounces and the altcoin market continues to get wrecked. Now, what's interesting is that the dominance of Bitcoin, when you sort of zoom out, it looks, I mean, from my perspective, this is a very bullish thing, right? It's a very bullish trend because, there's all sorts of narratives that people are going to tell you as to why the dominance is bearish. But when you look at this, objectively, what did it do? It broke out of a 2-year consolidation window. This started in May of 2021 and lasted until June of 2023, so approximately 2 years. It broke out, and then it back tested the breakout point. So do you remember when we were looking at lower time frames for Bitcoin dominance on the daily, how it would bounce, it would move out of the breakout zone, back test, and then move up? This is the same thing as that, except on a much larger time scale, right? It broke out, it back tested the breakout point, which also conveniently for us corresponds to the bull market support band, right? And now it's bouncing off of it just like we thought it might, right? Just like we thought it might. I am not of the opinion that Bitcoin dominance spent 2 years in this sort of consolidation mode to just have a fake out move. I think that the dominance is likely going to continue to move up. Again, with that nuance that if it wants to follow similar patterns, it can always back test and go back down. I mean, it's always possible for it to go back below 50%, maybe go back to 49% or something, but it doesn't change anything, right? It doesn't change anything. And it likely will continue to break out to the upside. So there's other ways that we can look at this as well. So if you go the year-to-date ROI metric, we can also look at it for various metrics in the Cryptoverse, okay? And we're going to pull it up for dominance without stablecoins for Bitcoin. And what I want you to look at in this case is this idea of how do we get to 60%, okay? Because I've thrown this number out many times. How is that possible? Well, look at 2023 Bitcoin dominance, excluding stables. You can see it's about 1.15. So we're up on the year about 1.15x for Bitcoin dominance. Now, what I want us to do is I want us to add the average of 2015 and 2019. Just look at the average. And look at that chart. The end of the year dominance without stablecoins year-to-date ROI average for 2019 and 2015 was 1.25x. We're currently at 1.15x, meaning approximately you have another 10% move left. Well, a 10% move would get Bitcoin dominance to approximately 60%. Approximately, right? I don't know exactly where it'll top out. I mean, maybe it's a little bit lower, maybe it's a little bit higher, maybe it's a lot higher. I don't know. But that is where the trend is currently going. Now you might say, well, we're well below this trend. What makes you think we're going to catch up to it? We're below it over here and we caught up. We were below it over here and we caught up. We're below it again. I think I would say we could catch up again. Add another 5% to the dominance, hopefully sometime over the next 2 months. Get us to that 54, 55% level by October, November, and then maybe we'll have our final rally into the end of the year, only for it to fade in the first part of the halving year. That's what it normally does. I don't really know why a lot of people think this time is going to be different. But that is what I'm looking at. I mean, you can look at the chart and say, there are going to be people that are going to fade this thing the entire way. Right? I mean, the Bitcoin USD is doing what it always does in pre-halving years, right? It spends half the year going up and half the year going down. Now, on today, it's going up, but arguably, we said it was likely going to go up as well because we're getting our typical death cross rally, right? Bitcoin normally gets a death cross rally. Why should this time be any different? In fact, in 2019, we had a death cross rally that lasted several days and took Bitcoin up several percentage points before it eventually rolled back over and put in a lower low. So yes, we can have moves up in a downtrend. It doesn't mean the downtrend's not happening. Just like in the first half of the year, when Bitcoin fell back down, it didn't mean the uptrend was broken. Just like in a downtrend, temporary moves to the upside don't mean the downtrend is broken. So we have to be aware that these moves to the upside by Bitcoin, the death cross rally, what does it do? It breaks altcoins off of their Bitcoin support levels. So we talked briefly about total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, right? So we talked briefly about this and how, it's just getting rejected by the bull market support band. And, we've talked about it at length, right? It just pulling it back up. We've talked about this a lot, about how it likely just gets rejected here and eventually goes back down. But you can look at individual altcoins and see the same trend. What we're going to start with is not an altcoin. I want to look at Ethereum. So let's look at Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation, because that's the biggest one that will contribute the most to Bitcoin dominance, okay? So what I want you to do is look closely at this Ether Bitcoin trend. What do you notice? You notice that it sort of slightly moves up, and then eventually it breaks support, right? It'll have these little trend lines that it'll hold, and then eventually it breaks support over and over and over again. But a lot of people have been bullish on Ether Bitcoin for the last year, but it keeps putting in lower highs and lower lows. That's what it is, right? But these people are never going to admit that. They're just going to say, well, it's a falling wedge, or they'll say, oh, just you wait, right? Just you wait. But the problem is this is still a series of lower highs and lower lows. You cannot just simply say, oh, it's deflationary, therefore Ethereum's going to outperform Bitcoin. You can't say that. This should be proof that you can't say that. If the merge were such an important event that would fundamentally change Ether Bitcoin price patterns, why has Ether Bitcoin been putting in lower highs and lower lows since the merge? Okay? I can't find people that want to give a valid answer to that other than to just say, well, just you wait. Yes, eventually I agree Ether Bitcoin will go back up. I agree with that statement, but that doesn't mean that it can't go down first. And that's the argument, is that if you are macro bullish on Ether Bitcoin, even if you think that it takes out 0.08 next cycle, which is a potential outcome, it doesn't mean that it won't go down first before making that move. Okay? So we have to be honest with ourselves about, look, guys, this is lower highs and lower lows. But look at this trend. Every time that, I think most every single time that Ether Bitcoin is broken off of its support level, it's because Bitcoin has gone up, right? Like a lot of times you can see that Bitcoin goes up, it breaks Ether Bitcoin down, right? When it's going up, it breaks Ether Bitcoin down. Again, over here, right? It went up and it broke Ether Bitcoin off of its support. Just like right here, you can see that Ether Bitcoin was holding this level, and then now Bitcoin is starting to go back up, and it broke Ether Bitcoin off of its support level. So the reason that we see these pumps in the pre-halving year is not because there's a lot of new liquidity coming into the market. It's just because a lot of people are converting their altcoins to Bitcoin. For the first half of the year, there's sufficient liquidity in the altcoin market to continue to lead to new yearly highs for Bitcoin USD. But eventually the altcoin market is bled dry. And while people continue to convert their altcoins to Bitcoin, there's just not as much liquidity in the altcoin market. And so the purchasing power of those altcoins to go buy that Bitcoin is a lot less, right? So like if you had converted your ETH to Bitcoin, say in the beginning of the year, you were getting, it was at around, 7.5% Ether Bitcoin. Now it's at just above 6%, right? So the purchasing power of your alts again, or at least of ETH against Bitcoin, has gone down. So for the people that say, all right, Bitcoin is outperforming the rest of the market, they go convert their alts to Bitcoin. The further out you get in the pre-halving year, there's just not a lot of liquidity left. Okay, and that's why Bitcoin USD just tends to put in lower highs in the second half of the pre-halving year, because the liquidity has just been drying up. And there's not really new liquidity coming into the market. And the only reason you see altcoins occasionally go up is because people are just moving money around from one altcoin to another, and it's also just positioning, right? If people are getting, leveraged or something, sometimes you can just see moves in the opposite direction other than what fundamentally makes sense for a short term, but then eventually they ultimately break down. So here's a great example of how Bitcoin pumps break altcoins off of their Bitcoin support level. I also want to show you another one. Look at ADA Bitcoin. Look at ADA Bitcoin. Look right now what's happening. ADA Bitcoin is starting to break down below this support level that it's been holding. Remember, in pre-halving years, what happens when Bitcoin pumps? It breaks altcoins off of their Bitcoin support levels so that when Bitcoin goes back down, those altcoins just simply have nowhere to hide. The altcoins just continue to get wrecked on their Bitcoin pairs and they go lower. So the argument here is that if Bitcoin continues to go up, it could easily break ADA Bitcoin off of this support level, which arguably is already happening, right? It's already arguably happening right now. And so that by the time Bitcoin USD rolls over, ADA Bitcoin no longer has this support level to bounce off of anymore. And then it just goes down. Look at the ADA Bitcoin trend here, right? It moves up, it then goes down and puts in a new low. It moves up, it then goes down and puts in a new low. Moves up, it then goes down and puts in a new low, right? Like 40% drops, approximately. And it just keeps happening. It just keeps happening. You must be aware of this trend. It's a brutal trend. You know I don't make any friends by calling these trends out, but I've been absolutely wrecked in the altcoin market in more cycles than I care to admit. And I learned this lesson the hard way, so hopefully you don't have to. If anyone's honest about the altcoin market, you would look at it and see most altcoins just keep putting in new lows, especially on their Bitcoin pairs. AVAX Bitcoin is putting in new lows today, basically, right? Just keeps going down. Look at dot Bitcoin. Just keeps going down. Look at yearly candles for Polkadot. If you understood sort of like so for people who sort of dismiss the Bitcoin dominance theory, if they understood it and they sort of looked at dominance back at the beginning of the year at 40%, and they're like, well, why would my altcoin go up now? Look at dot Bitcoin. It's down 41% this year. It's made absolutely no sense to buy these altcoins over buying Bitcoin if you're going to get exposure to the cryptoverse. Look at ADA Bitcoin. It's down 36% this year. It was down 47% last year. So what it shows you is that for most altcoins, there's been no great reason to buy them over Bitcoin. That doesn't mean that Bitcoin can't go down. Sometimes people say, well, Bitcoin's going to go down too. That's part of the theory, though, is that it goes down for half the year, right? So that you basically have this rotation of capital away from higher risk assets to lower risk assets. So by the end of the year, the market cap might not be that different than it was before, but perhaps so much more of the money is now in Bitcoin as opposed to altcoins. So you can also look at, so we looked at dominance without stablecoins. If you look at this dominance chart, this is including stablecoins, right? So when you look at it including stablecoins, you can see it's been in a general uptrend for a while, right? And arguably it's starting to push back near these highs. It doesn't look as close to the highs on this chart because TradingView changed the definition of total 3 a few weeks ago. So I think they added, 10 to 15 billion of market cap to total 3. So that's why dominance on TradingView took a bigger hit. But if you just look at it consistently on my website, right, dominance is at 49%. It's lower than TradingView, but I'm including a lot more coins. So on my website, Bitcoin dominance is at 49%. On TradingView, it's at 50%. But because my website has been keeping it consistent, it hasn't been changing it, like halfway through the cycle or something. You can see that we're already much closer to these prior highs. Now, I mentioned earlier that if you exclude stablecoins, we've been putting in higher lows since May of 2021, and you can clearly see that. This is May of 2021. Dominance has been putting in higher lows. The reason it put in lower lows when you include stables is just because the stablecoin market cap made up such a large market share. But you can see clearly that Bitcoin dominance excluding stablecoins has been putting in higher lows since May of 2021. And it looks like it's just building back up to break out again. But again, people are likely going to fade it every step of the way. And I honestly don't know what's going to convince them. A lot of people ask me on Twitter, what if you're wrong about altcoins? I'm like, at what point would you say that I'm right on them, right? At what point would you agree with the dominance theory? Do you wait for it to get to 60% to then capitulate? I'm not saying, at this point in the cycle, altcoins are down so much. I'm not asking anyone to sort of make any conversions or anything like that. But what I am saying is that, the warnings have been there since Q1 of 2022. We have said relentlessly that altcoins will continue to bleed against Bitcoin since Q1 of 2022. And that's basically all they've done is they've bled against Bitcoin. They've bled against Bitcoin. So, I'm still of the opinion that dominance will go higher. Yes, it could backtest 49% again if it wants to, but it doesn't have to. Now, I want to address something else, because some people say, well, Bitcoin dominance only goes up when Bitcoin USD goes up. That's not true. The most brutal part of the cycle, and I hope that I've prepared people enough for it, the most brutal part of the cycle is when Bitcoin goes down and altcoins go down more. This is the most brutal part. And you might say, well, that hasn't happened this year. If you look closely, it has. If you look closely, and I'll show you a couple different places you can find it. The first one is not as convincing. The second one is. Look at Bitcoin USD for the last 4 weeks. The last 4 weeks. Red, 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 green. Red, 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 green. What's Bitcoin dominance done for the last 4 weeks? Green, 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 green. Bitcoin USD went down 3 weeks in a row. During that time, Bitcoin dominance went up 3 weeks in a row. Bitcoin USD went up again this week after going down for 3 weeks. Bitcoin dominance went up more. Bitcoin pumps are more devastating for alt Bitcoin pairs than Bitcoin dumps oftentimes. So a lot of times people look at a Bitcoin pump and it drags their altcoin up on its USD pair, and then they get excited because their altcoin is marginally off their prior lows. But what they don't recognize is that their altcoin is just getting wrecked on its Bitcoin pair. And so this is an example where Bitcoin USD was going down for 3 weeks in a row. It didn't feel like it was going down necessarily. Three red candles, right? 1, 2, 3. Every single week, Bitcoin dominance went up. You may say, well, it's not a lot. There's another example as well that I don't really think a lot of people give a lot of credit for, but I think it gave you a glimpse as to what's coming. I think it gives you a glimpse. And if you you have to squint to see it. You have to squint to see it, but I want to show it to you in case you missed it. Look at June. The answer lies with June. Look at Bitcoin USD and the dominance. Now, do you remember in June when Bitcoin bounced off its 20-week SMA and then everyone thought that the only reason dominance was going up was because Bitcoin bounced? That's not true. Look closely at what dominance was doing. Dominance are these candles. It was starting to break out here. It broke out of this prior consolidation, this 2-year consolidation. It broke out while Bitcoin was going down, right? So Bitcoin dominance went from 47% to 49% while Bitcoin USD went down. It's clear. It's clear. It only lasted a few days, right? It only lasted a few days. Let's sort of figure out exactly how long it lasted so that we're not leaving here with any hand waving going on. Dominance started moving here. Bitcoin USD went down 8 days in a row. And during those 8 days, Bitcoin dominance went from about 47.2% to about 49.2% or so. Bitcoin went down during that time. But when you zoom out, you'll miss that week, right? You'll miss that week if you zoom out, because all you might be tempted to look at is say, well, Bitcoin dominance broke out this week, but yeah, so Bitcoin USD was also breaking out. So that was why dominance broke out. But no, if you look closely, dominance was already breaking out before Bitcoin USD went up. Bitcoin USD going up only made the breakout even more compelling and only made altcoins more wrecked. So the answer lies in June, in that dominance started to go up in a Bitcoin USD downtrend. It only lasted 8 days. Bitcoin dominance can go up in a Bitcoin USD downtrend, even though I know a lot of people haven't seen it happen for more than a couple of days. But I'm telling you, it can happen. And I think it will happen. And, there's a good chance that Bitcoin gets rejected off of the bull market support band. If it does, then altcoins get wrecked. If it doesn't, and Bitcoin goes through the 20-week SMA and gets another pump up to the yearly highs, then what happens? Altcoins get wrecked on their Bitcoin pairs. That's all they've done all year. Anytime Bitcoin goes up, the altcoin market gets wrecked under Bitcoin pairs. That's in fact what breaks these altcoins off their Bitcoin support levels, are these Bitcoin pumps. So if you hold altcoins in pre-halving years, Bitcoin pumps are more detrimental for your Satoshi value. Now, they might be beneficial for the USD value of your portfolio, but all my hair is going to turn gray, I think, before I convince everyone why they should look at their Satoshi value over the USD value. The reason, again, is because simply if you're taking on more risk with altcoins, you should get more reward. But if you're taking on all this risk with altcoins and they've only gone up 10% or something while Bitcoin went up 100%, then what are you doing? Right? What are you doing? Look at Bitcoin. Look at a yearly candle. And this should tell you everything you need to know. Bitcoin this year is up 61%. Ethereum this year, only up 36%. ADA this year, it's up 2%. Polkadot, it's down 5%. Solana, it's up 90%. Solana is an exception. Why is Solana up so much more than say ADA? Why is it up so much more? Well, because Solana went down a lot more. ADA last year went down 81%. Solana last year went down 94%. Okay? And the recent outperformance of Solana is nothing more than mean reversion. If you don't believe me, look at this chart. ROI after the latest cycle peak for all these different coins. So let's look at the top 25. Let's look at the top 25 and let's isolate just a few of them. Look at ADA and then look at Solana. Yes, Solana has outperformed ADA recently, but from measured from the high, Solana is down more than ADA. This outperformance by Solana in 2023 was only because it got wrecked more in 2022 than ADA got wrecked. But they're both getting sufficiently wrecked, right? They're both getting wrecked. I mean, ADA is at 0.084 of its peak, and Solana is at 0.073 of its last peak. So ADA's at 8.5%, Solana's at 7.3% of its peak. They both have been absolutely wrecked. So yeah, Solana is up more this year, but arguably that was because the losses on it got pulled forward due to the FTX collapse. So you can always find some that outperform, but the reason why this one has outperformed more this year is because it went down 94% last year. Not a lot of altcoins went down that much. Not a lot of the top ones. I mean, last year, Ethereum went down 67%. ADA, 81. DOT, 83. Avalanche last year, 90. Matic last year, 69%. Link last year, 71%. Solana last year, 94%, right? So you can sometimes find alts that have bounced more this year, right? You can, but a lot of times they only bounce because they got wrecked more. And the people that, will sort of say stuff, a lot of times they sort of end up buying these altcoins all the way down, and then they end up being the people that capitulate at the bottom, and then they sort of use that reference point to say why their altcoin is doing well, but it's not like they bought it there, right? It's mostly like they just bought it all the way down and are then going to use that reference point to sort of exclaim why it was a better investment. But I'm telling you, Bitcoin has outperformed almost all these altcoins. Look at Solana's Bitcoin valuation. Look at it. Has there really been any great reason to be that interested in this altcoin? Has there? Just one lower high after another. We'll see if it holds these lows in a Bitcoin USD downtrend, but there's no guarantee. And so you have to take a look at that. Has there been any reason to get Avalanche? It's just one lower high after another. And again, anytime these altcoins pump, anytime ADA pumps a few percent here or there, everyone comes out of the woodwork to tell you why the dominance theory is wrong. But then where are they on the next lower high? Okay? Where are they on the next lower high? It's the same thing. And it's the same thing over and over and over again. It's been going on for almost 2 years now. And I don't know. I don't know what to say to. I mean, I guess at this point you either buy into the theory or you don't, right? I mean, if I haven't convinced you at this point, I doubt I'm going to convince you. But I just, my own experience, I see a lot of people come out on every single lower high to tell me why the dominance is going down. And it ends up just being another lower high for all of these altcoins. Look at BNB Bitcoin. Just one lower high after another. Matic Bitcoin. Look at this. I mean, this is just some type of massive distribution phase or something, right? Kind of like the Wyckoff distribution for Bitcoin USD in 2021. Is that what Matic Bitcoin is doing over here? 4 peaks. Aave Bitcoin. Break down below the 2022 low. Break down, back test the bull market support band, go down. A lot of these are probably going to follow the same thing. ADA Bitcoin will probably do the same thing. Break down, back test, go down further. Solana Bitcoin could do the same thing. Avalanche Bitcoin at some point will pump back up. Everyone will say this time is it, and then it'll probably just keep going down. So you have to be careful with altcoins, okay? You have to be careful. I say this because I have been wrecked doing it, okay? I say this because I used to think like, oh, the altcoin will recover. But I'm telling you, the reason why it's dangerous to DCA altcoins in bear market years and pre-halving years is because you don't know which ones are going to survive. You don't know. I don't know which ones are going to survive. The truth is that most of them probably won't. And the few that do will be used to convince you why it would have made sense to YOLO into those in 2 to 3 years. But there's this survivorship bias. For every one of those that goes back up to new all-time highs, there's probably 1,000 or 100 that just went to zero. So you must understand that DCing into altcoins in pre-halving years and bear market years is very, very dangerous, especially if they're putting in lower lows in their Bitcoin pairs. If they're putting in higher lows in their Bitcoin pairs or they're holding their lows in their Bitcoin pairs, that's another story, and you could come up with some type of justification there. But if they're putting in lower lows in their Bitcoin pairs, what are you doing? You're taking on more risk and getting less reward. And oftentimes, that strategy is losing money. It's losing money. I want to address one more thing. Because, a lot of people are going to look at Total 3 and be like, hasn't it been wrecked enough? Like, why does it have to go down anymore? Why does it? Does it have to go down anymore? Is this not sufficient, right? Some might say, is this not sufficient? Well, they might be right. They might be. So far, we see most altcoins continuing to go down, right? So far. And there's always a chance that the altcoin market could bottom out before I'm willing to turn bullish on it. There's a chance, and we have to admit that. If you're looking for me to be right about everything, I guarantee you I'm going to let you down. So do away with that. I will let you down if you think I'm going to be right about it all. So please be aware of that. It's happened many, many times in the past, and it'll happen many, many times in the future. But I am not yet convinced that the altcoin market is done bleeding. I think that we are nearing the end of the rate hiking cycle. We might already be through it. And at some point, the yield curve will uninvert and we will likely get a recession or a recession scare. And in that moment, I think, is when the altcoin market bottoms. Not before. Now, it might be, some people might say, well, why does it have to keep bleeding? Well, I would say last time it bled, last time alts were putting in new lows all the way out until March of 2020. And you might say, well, that was because of the pandemic. That was because of this black swan. That's not even entirely true. A lot of alts were still putting in new lows, right? Even before that. Go take a look at XRP. Take a look at XRP. Look at 2019. Putting in new lows for all of 2019. This was December of 2019. It was putting in new lows, right? We didn't even get the recession pandemic crash until 2020, but it was still putting in new lows. So altcoins, what they do in pre-halving years is they bleed against Bitcoin. And in bear market years. In bear market years and pre-halving years, that's what they generally do, is they bleed against Bitcoin. And Total 3 did not even bottom out last cycle until 2 months before the halving. So there's precedent to say, guys, there's a chance that the altcoin market might not even bottom until a few months before the halving again. One example to sort of support that thesis is look at the NASDAQ. And I know a lot of you guys already know what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyways. Go look at the NASDAQ and go look at what was happening in the dot-com crash. It's an identical pattern almost. It's not precise, but it's very, very close to being the same. And pull up the 50-week moving average, right? So pull up that 50-week. That's sort of your guide. And you can clearly see a low, a lower low, a double top off the 50-week, a back test of the 50-week. This is equivalent to your SEC Ripple news. I'll show you in a second. A back test of the 50-week followed by another final low. So you see that chart, a lower low, a low, a lower low, a double top off the 50-week, a back test of it, down, and then finally bottomed out. Look at total 3. It's not the same thing. It looks very similar to me. Look at the 50-week. Look at total 3. A low, a lower low, a double top off the 50-week. This rally here off the 50-week is the same thing as this one, right? It's your SEC Ripple news, where everyone said that this time is different and the fundamentals have changed. The narratives don't matter when liquidity is drying up, okay? Liquidity matters, not narratives about altcoins, not the SEC. A court case isn't going to bring, liquidity into the market during the fastest rate hiking cycle that we've basically ever seen by the Fed. That's not what's going to bring people back. But the issue is that after this final top by the NASDAQ, the market still bled from here for another 30 weeks. Where does a 30-week bleed get you from the SEC Ripple news? Where does a 30-week bleed get you? Does it get you a couple months before the halving like last cycle? It puts you in February. The projected halving, what, is in April? 2 months before the halving, which is exactly where total 3 bottomed at last cycle, 2 months before the halving, in a recession. I think that the altcoin market would likely bottom out early on in a recession. Like once you see the headlines that the recession is actually here, that's probably when the altcoin market actually has bottomed already, okay? Because people price it in before it gets here. By the time the recession arrives, you might say, well, why would the altcoin market go back up if the recession's here? Well, the reason is because when recessions arrive, the Fed has to start printing again. Now, with inflation the way it is, they might not be as quick to print, but they probably will print when a recession arrives. So when you see a recession like 2020, it's probably a bullish thing for the altcoin market because it means liquidity is on the way. And altcoins survive off of excess liquidity. Look at net liquidity over total 3. Okay, look at net liquidity and overlay it with total 3. Right? Looks pretty similar. If liquidity is going down, the altcoin market is generally dropping. If liquidity is going up, the altcoin market is generally going up. Liquidity keeps dropping. So when a recession arrives, the Fed will start printing at some point, somewhere shortly thereafter. And once they start printing, that excess liquidity will start to need to find a home. And some of that home will be found in the riskiest of assets because they'll be down 97 or 98% from their all-time highs. It doesn't mean that their fair value is 98% down from their all-time highs, but in recessions, things get grossly undervalued. And that's where all the outsized gains come from. The people that made the most on altcoins last cycle were not the people that bought all the way down in 2018. It was the people that waited and really got in during the recession, right? They made a killing. A lot of altcoins are putting in new lows the entire way. So that's why you have to look at it like this. Now, another reason that I think the altcoin market is still sort of in the process of bleeding is because the social risk continues to go down. Now, the social risk is getting to pretty low levels, right? But it hasn't yet reached the very, very bottom. It doesn't mean that it has to, but I would also argue there's a good chance that social risk will start to go up before the altcoin market collectively bottoms, right? You might see in the same way that social risk can sometimes go down and prices can go up. Sometimes the social risk might go up and prices could still go down because the market just hasn't completely made that U-turn back around. Like you might see that social divergence to the upside, but we've still seen a series of lower highs and lower lows on the social risk. So as the social risk keeps going down, the Bitcoin dominance keeps going up. If you don't know what I mean, like go look at the Bitcoin dominance, right? So let's look at dominance without stablecoins of Bitcoin. So this is Bitcoin dominance without stablecoins, and then add on. Sorry, I need to add on the I want to add on the social risk as well. That's what I want to do. I want to add on the social risk, right? So you can see that as social risk goes down, dominance excluding stables goes up. As social risk goes down, dominance excluding stables goes up, right? Even over here, after social risk hit these lows, when it hung around these lows, the dominance still kept going up, right? It didn't go, the dominance didn't just make a U-turn the minute the social risk bottomed out. Because the social risk was still down here in the lower risk band, the dominance still kept going up. It wasn't until the social risk really started to make significantly higher lows that the dominance finally went back down. And that was because a lot of people came back into the Cryptoverse to buy all the altcoins after the parabolic Bitcoin rally. But they're not going to come back into the Cryptoverse because Bitcoin moved up $1,000, but they will come back if Bitcoin puts in a new all-time high. And that is when the dominance goes back down. Normally, after Bitcoin breaks these prior all-time highs, you'll see people flood back into the market. They don't buy Bitcoin. They go buy all the new shiny altcoins. And then the dominance goes down. And then we spend the next 2 painful years after that watching the dominance go back up slowly. And people fade it every step of the way. So that is where we currently are. There are a lot of people out there that are very bearish on the Bitcoin dominance. They say all sorts of things about me and whatnot. And I'm not gonna go into it. But I'm telling you, dominance has been moving up for 2 years, excluding stables. It's been putting in higher lows, including stables, since September of 2022. Social risk is going down. Liquidity is drying up. Altcoins are breaking down on their Bitcoin pairs. Bitcoin rallies cause these altcoins to break down on their Bitcoin pairs so that when Bitcoin drops in the second half of the year, the altcoins have nowhere to hide. You can average out year-to-date ROI of Bitcoin dominance in 2015 and 2019 and see that we could easily go up another 10% on dominance, and it would not be out of the realm of prior expectations, and so on and so on and so on. So I've laid out the thesis yet again as to why the dominance should go much higher. I will admit it could backtest. It could spend a little bit of time in this 49 to 50% level, but I think that we will see it much higher by the end of the year. And every single time the dominance moves up, we do tend to consolidate, right? We do tend to consolidate some, but every single consolidation just leads to another breakout. Every single one leads to a new breakout. And I do not expect this time to be any different. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. We do publish 3 premium videos per week, so if you like the videos that I do on the public channel and you want more of those, we do 3 premium videos on the ITC Premium. 2 of those are pre-recorded. One is an AMA where I answer people's questions. So make sure you check that out if you're looking for something like that. And also, if you're not looking for something like that, we do have a free tier, right? So you can get access to a weekly newsletter and several free charts on the website if you so desire. You just have to go to the website and sign up. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you guys for tuning in. Subscribe. See you guys next time. Bye.